Hey everybody, welcome back to How I Did That. I guess today I'm going to be talking about how I did a new game that I made called Icy Tracks to Paradise. I'm not really sure how I'm going to go about talking about this since it's a game as compared to when I normally do videos like this. I have an animation where that has a pretty clearly defined beginning, middle, and an end. I guess I would talk about how I came up with the concept that was a Voices of the Void style game, but instead of being in a satellite base, you're in a train. That was, of course, based off of some atmospheric, sort of comfy videos and images that I saw on Twitter of somebody in a train in Japan or something. Of somebody in a train, and that was just like, that looks pretty cozy and nice, and maybe I'd like to make that a game of my own. But then, of course, I thought, I'm no good at making 3D games, so I'm not very good at making Game Maker games, so what if I tried making a 2D version of my 3D game concept to see if there's any interest for that idea, and sort of see if people would want to see it. And then I made the game, and nobody has played it or talked about it. So let's just begin with the player. I don't know how much of this I really need to get into, but Game Maker is sort of built on a number of different systems, mainly revolving around objects. Each object has the events that happen every frame, every frame, where there's the create, there's the step, or something that happens every frame, numerous alarms that can be set, and then that ticks down every frame. There's the draw, which is like the step event, but it's a different calculation where it's just drawing as compared to doing like math and stuff like that. Draw GUI, which is the drawer event, but it's on the screen space instead of the world space. There's key presses and collisions, and a whole bunch of different things, like if something leaves the view or the world of the game. I don't really need to get into all that. But if we have a look at the player, you can see that I have a number of variables being set. The yellow exclamation mark next to it means that it's only referenced once and that I didn't end up implementing it into the game. Some ideas about how you would lose your legs at some point, if you could hold something. I was thinking of adding a very limited inventory system where your inventory is your hands. Facing, I didn't end up needing to do that because that was just calculated using the horizontal scale of the sprite. So if you're facing left, it would be -1, or if you're facing right, it would be 1. Wood is something else. That's a different concept that I'll probably go into later. So the step event, this is where movement is calculated. I have different regions set up. Makes it easy. I'm not going to go into all the programming because it is not good. There's sort of mixes of efficient things and not efficient things. A lot of redundancies probably, but in general, it worked for what I wanted to do. A lot of the time it didn't. The basic movement is always the easiest thing to do. It was actually a recent thing that I found that GameMaker added was just this called Move and Collide, and that's just that condenses all of the previous movement code that I would have written into one simple function, and it's just wow, that's great. That's perfect. However, since the Move and Collide checks for only one object that it collides against, The way that I decided to do hitboxes was to use one specific block, a debug block, and then just whenever it's spawned, it would not render itself. So all of the objects that have collisions, like the walls, the trees, the icebox, the fireplace, the train, that's all the block, and the block has numerous variables in its create event, a lot of which end up not getting used, but that basically defines the type of block that it is. In the step event, this is the one that happens every frame, this is probably not a good way to do it, but it checks that if it is a block that can be pushed, and if it is, then when it's pushed, gets pushed. So that's a really simple thing, and then if it was spawned to be a tree, it would check the nearest tree decal, and then it would say, that is me, so it's going to turn into an object block tree, and then turn itself back into a regular tree, because the object block tree, the tree block object, does some visibility calculations that I added to try and optimize the game some more. We'll get into the optimization a bit, and you'll think, wow, this guy is really, really bad at programming. So, when the world is created, it goes ahead and generates just a ton of trees. These 4 loops that loops every time for this duration, so the room height is like 48,000. 48,000 divided by 4, 12,000. So there are 12,000 train tracks being spawned in the create, and then, all of these as well. That's why the game always lags whenever you enter a new world, is because it is generating all of these. And of course, that's a lot of instances for an HTML5 game. And so HTML, the internet, your internet browser isn't built to deal with all that. It's built for displaying a ton of letters. So yeah, it lagged pretty bad. So what I ended up doing is every tree used to draw itself. Just like when the tree was created, it would draw itself, and then you'd be like, oh, that's okay. But then all of those trees drawing themselves, it's kind of a lot. And so what I ended up doing was I created a sort of visibility thing. So I made it so that if something is outside of the view of the camera, it is deactivated. And then when it's inside the view of the camera, it's reactivated. That sort of lagged, so I made it happen every 5 frames instead of every frame. So it feels a bit smoother, since it's not every frame, just constantly reactivating objects that are already active. I think that's how that worked. I'm really not sure. So the first thing I did to try and make it run a bit smoother is having only the object block trees do the self-rendering. So there was a bunch of math in the step event that would check to see how close the player was, and then if they were close enough, they would render itself at a different opacity level. That was laggy because, yeah, every single tree, every frame was checking how far away the player was. That's a lot of calculations for a game to make. That didn't end up going so well. So what I ended up doing was I created a tree renderer. You can see I created an up and a down, but I ended up only using the down because it's half the calculation. Every object's depth depends on its negative y value. So the further down the world you are, the closer you get to the camera. Pretend I did air quotes around the closer. And that was good for the faux 3D effect, where walls and trees can be in front of the player. It's very cool. So basically what I ended up doing with the tree renderer is it would check whether the player was inside or outside, because if you're inside, you don't need to worry about the trees being in front of you. When you're outside, you would check if the block was connected to the tree, if the root was equal to 1, so true. If that was true, then it would check if you are sort of near the player, and it would say y is greater than other y. That's like just checking in depth. But point distance, the x and y of the block, how far right it is in the room and how far down it is in the room, and then compare it to the calling instance, which is the tree renderer. And then if that was less than or equal to 64, then it would set this to true. And then if that was true, then this is some math that I was helped with. I don't know exactly how it works. I know how it works. So yeah, if we're close enough, then we draw it basically, and it is drawn compared to the distance increments, like how close it is divided by 16. So it's like if you're 64 pixels away, it's 0, and then 32, it's 0.25 or 0.5. So basically it would just render if you were right next to it, which is exactly what I wanted. So trees get more visible the closer you are. That's basically what all this crap was about. And that made the rendering, the gameplay much smoother. Before you would get a pretty consistent 5 frames per second, but after all of my days or weeks of trying to optimize it, you instead got to about 60 frames per second, depending on what internet browser you're using. And that is, that's good. That's what I wanted. One of the landmarks that you can come across in this game is a cabin. And what I did for creating the cabin is basically this object that I called an earth mover would spawn and then just pick a random position based on if there's like a free chunk of space. And then if there was, it would create a bunch of walls. This was originally made with some relatively complicated math of trigonometry and so on. Arguably pretty simple math of trigonometry. To be able to be spawned at specific angles. Well, not specific angles, random angles that you can see here. There was originally a bunch of trigonometry to sort of guess the angle, but instead what I ended up doing was just creating flat walls, because this is a pixel art game. Having sort of random arbitrary angles just sort of didn't really fit in with the aesthetic. The door used to be able to appear on the sides because when it was at an angle, you'd be able to see the door easily. And then I also added the roof, which made it harder to see the door. So, yeah. The way the train moves was kind of weird to set up, because I couldn't really figure out how to move all of the objects without having to call them all individually. But fortunately, what I ended up figuring out was parenting. You can just parent all of the objects to an object. It doesn't even need to be in the scene, but any transformation you make to the parent object or the children objects follow it as well. So that was very convenient. Everything I just needed to make a child of object trainees. The character has a neat little internal monologue button. So when you press space, either you interact with something, depending on whether you're right next to it, or your character has a little thought pop up. Usually their internal monologue is pretty quiet, just 3 little dots. But if you're close to an object of interest, instead, the player will comment on it. Also, if the player's hunger or sleep is below a certain level, when you press space, your character will tell you that they're tired or hungry, or they don't feel good, depending on how low all of your stats are. Hey, see right there? Yeah, see? The way I did the text pop-up, this was something that I sort of took a hot minute to figure out the math of, but fortunately I figured it out. Right, I did so when it's created, you can see these variables. So when it's the first step, if it receives text, then it sets blab to the input text, and then it then calculates the length of blab. Then what we do is we calculate the length of blab again, and then with a new variable bib, or is it bulb? It's bulb, my mistake. It sort of inserts into this blank string the character at the start of the blab text, and then it sort of loops through that a few times until it fills out, and then when it's done, then it starts to fade away. And then it would just draw itself, since it's constantly being set to the player's X value, it is then calculating just half the length of the text being drawn and the rectangle, and then it can just draw itself outwards in both directions to stay centered above the player. I'm sorry if that sounded weird, a dog just came into my room. Game Maker, also very cool feature, is it has effects that you can just slap on. You don't need to worry about doing any sort of figuring out math or shaders or surfaces or anything like that. So instead what you have is just pre-made little effects that you can drop on, and that is very convenient. You can also just apply an effect to an instance layer, which is kind of crazy, a background layer as well. And that is what I have incorporated throughout the game to make it look more like a cool old classic arcade game, or just like a Five Nights at Freddy's arcade game. I sort of wanted the gameplay to feel a bit immersive, so what I did is there are several overlays that can come on. There's freezing, there's hungry, there's tired, and these are actually really simple little materials that I set up in Blender and then just exported at a pretty low file resolution. As you can see, the freezing overlay. Ooh. Brr, is it cold in here or is it just me? So it calculates based on your sort of stats, how visible it should be, and then if it is too visible, and then you sort of start taking damage. And it's got the cooldown so you don't permanently take damage. You died is how I kept track of a lot of different variables after a point. All of your stats in the game, the sort of wind control, both of pitch and volume, See, so it's just, oh, that's after you die. This is the text it tells you. But every time the room starts, it reapplies all of the stats to the player. And just to make sure there's some consistency, because it is a persistent object, that means it remains the same between levels. It also keeps track of the distance with the distance tracker. Does all this. Yeah, if you go through the world without the train, then it deletes the train because you decided to walk through the tunnel. Why would you do that? Stupid. Right. With the tree, the way that I had the trees be not really lagging with all of the trees drawing themselves. Instead, what I did was created a surface. I got some help with this. So it creates a surface, all of the trees draw themselves. This is something I knew nothing about. DS lists. I still know nothing about them, frankly. But yeah, it draws all the trees based on their sort of negative Y value, so that the fake depth still works. And then it sort of, the trees don't draw themselves anymore, so it's all just controlled by the world object. So you're just drawing one giant surface instead of like 1,000 individual trees. That reduced the lag as well. Here is the sprite sheet. As you can see, the game originally started with a more sort of cartoony aesthetic before I decided to go for more realistic proportions. There is the 5 different trees and 10 different snow that can appear on top, just to add more randomness. There is some sprites I ended up not using of the logs and sticks when you were going to be able to cut down the trees with this axe here. That was scrapped halfway through development, I'd say. Some stumps that when a tree falls over in the forest and no one's around to hear it, this is what they leave behind. Some other random stuff. There's a lot of stuff that I thought about and ended up not adding. A lot of this stuff is in the game, but you probably won't see it. So, where have I been? It's a very good question, a very valid, fair question to ask. And I've been here. Sort of just stuck in my own little world. I thought that I don't know, making something interactive would really click with more people. That would draw out more comments and interactions. But it didn't. I guess it was just a bit of hopefulness on my part. I haven't been doing too well. I mean, I don't even know what to say, really. I don't even know if I like making games. I don't know if I even like making videos. It's just things to do. But even then, it's I don't get anything for it. Brief passing interest. What the hell is that? I'm trying to be mopey and some guys just dancing around on the bottom of my screen. The hell? Okay. You know what? Yeah. Yeah. We're all just cultists dancing in the snow. Fuck it. Bye-bye.